gyroscope. This dependency exists for basic parts on the miniature Mercury compass, has its exact counterpart on an actual compass, the Sperry Mark 14. The rotor is 10 inches in diameter, with nearly all of its 55 pounds concentrated in the rim. To turn it 6,000 times a minute, this rotor is not driven by an external force. It is actually the armature of a three-phase induction motor. The rotor bars and laminations are mounted on the inside of the rim, and the field windings are bolted to the interior of the rotor case. The rotor axle revolves in ball bearings which fit into the bearing housings of the case. As a unit, the rotor and case constitute a complete electric motor which corresponds to the model gyroscope rotor with the inside ring. This horizontal ring represents the Mark 14 case. On the sides, two horizontal studs support the case in the bearings which are held by the vertical ring. The rotor and case are located inside the vertical ring, just as in the model. Then the C-frame holds this assembly on the model, while on the Mark 14, the corresponding assembly is supported by a wire composed of 18 separate strands. This is the basic component of the gyrocompass, and the first of our 5 major assemblies. Known as the sensitive element, it is simply a gyroscope rotor mounted so that it has the same necessary 3 degrees of freedom that are apparent in the model gyroscope. First, let's consider the spinning axis. The model gyroscope gets its power from force applied to a string. Since the compass is in itself an induction motor, its power comes from a 3-phase, 210-cycle, 50-volt current. Because of its weight, the rotor requires about 10 minutes to attain its speed of 6,000 revolutions a minute. As in the model gyroscope, the vertical ring provides the sensitive element with freedom of movement about the horizontal axis. The model is given freedom about the vertical axis by mounting it in a frame. On the Mark 14, vertical freedom is provided by the wire suspension. A pair of weights known as compensator weights are attached to the vertical ring so that the element is equally balanced in the north-south plane and in the east-west plane. Although the gyrocompass has 150 times the directive force of the magnetic compass as it turns toward the meridian, it still would not be sufficient to overcome the friction of an ordinary support. Since even the finest ball bearings would offer too much resistance, a practically frictionless method of mounting is employed. To accomplish this, a phantom ring is provided to form the basic part of the second major assembly, the phantom element. Then the sensitive element is suspended within the phantom ring by the wire suspension, the top end of which is secured to the top of the phantom stem, as seen in this cutaway model. The third major assembly is the spider element. This element provides a support for the first 2 assemblies, the sensitive and phantom elements. The stem of the phantom fits inside a thrust bearing on the spider, and the compass card is fastened on top of the phantom. As the sensitive element turns in seeking north, it would tend to twist the wire suspension. Then the wire, trying to untwist itself, would introduce a precessional force that would keep the compass from turning toward the meridian. To prevent the wire suspension from becoming twisted, the phantom does just what its name suggests. It follows every minute movement of the sensitive element, so the wire has no chance to become twisted. But what makes it follow so exactly? No, it isn't magnetism, and it isn't black magic. The power to drive the phantom in its pursuit of the sensitive element is supplied by the azimuth motor, which is geared to the phantom. With every movement of the sensitive element in either direction, the motor starts and drives the phantom ring around into perfect alignment. As we have already seen, The compass card is an integral part of the phantom element. Therefore, when the sensitive element turns in its north-seeking movement, the azimuth motor drives the phantom and the card into position. In this way, the zero mark of the card always remains aligned with the north-seeking axle, and the 180-degree marker stays aligned with the south axle. Response of the phantom is very quick, and the sensitive element seldom gets more than 2/10 of 1 degree away from the pursuing phantom. These movements are greatly exaggerated so that we can follow them more easily. Now the question is, what controls the direction and speed of the azimuth motor? If the sensitive element turns one way, what prevents the motor from driving the phantom the other way? What keeps the motor from driving the phantom faster or slower than the movements of the sensitive element? The answer is the electronic follow-up system. It consists of an amplifier with 3 electronic tubes and a transformer with a movable core. The entire purpose of these 2 elements is to control the current to the azimuth motor so that it will run in the right direction for the proper length of time. The transformer is mounted on the phantom ring. It has an E-shaped soft iron core with a primary coil in the center and 2 secondary coils wound in opposite directions. The movable core, known as the armature, is nothing more than a bar of soft iron. It is fastened to the east side of the sensitive element. Now when the sensitive element is again back in its place inside the phantom ring, we can see how the transformer is fastened to the phantom ring and the armature is attached to the sensitive element, so that the 2 parts are positioned opposite each other. They are very close together, with one side detached so that it can move across the face of the transformer when the sensitive element moves. This movement of the armature transmits electrical impulses to operate the second part of the follow-up system, the amplifier. The amplifier, in turn, controls the power which operates the azimuth motor, its speed and direction. Since the armature is fastened to the sensitive element, it is really the sensitive element that controls the azimuth motor. Now let's trace the chain of events that take place in this follow-up system. Suppose the compass has been started off the meridian. The sensitive element is turning toward true north. It carries the armature along with it, offsetting the armature in relation to the transformer. This produces a signal which is amplified to control the current sent to turn the azimuth motor. The motor drives the azimuth gear, which is fastened solidly to the phantom element. This causes the phantom to follow every movement of the sensitive element. This, then, is the operation of the follow-up system. Because the phantom is constantly following the sensitive element in either direction, the wire suspension cannot become twisted. Therefore, the sensitive element is free to turn in its north-seeking movement, unrestrained in this almost frictionless support, while the azimuth motor keeps the phantom in exact alignment and the zero mark of the card right on the north axle. To complete the compass, there are 2 more major assemblies. The mercury ballistic, our 4th major assembly, has 2 pairs of mercury tanks, 1 pair on the east side and 1 pair on the west side. The tanks of each pair are connected by a tube of small diameter through which the mercury can freely flow as the ballistic is tilted about the horizontal studs. These studs fit into bearings on the phantom. At present, the ballistic is free to move about its axis, accomplishing nothing. In order to serve its purpose of causing the rotor to precess, it must be connected to the rotor case. This is accomplished by means of a connecting link which fits over the offset bearing on the bottom of the rotor case. Now, if one side of the ballistic is heavier, the force of gravity will try to tilt the rotor, causing it to precess, bringing into operation those principles which make the gyroscope a compass. This is the complete master compass, ready to be installed in the binnacle, the 5th major assembly. The spider has 2 trunnions which carry the entire weight of the master compass. These trunnions are supported in athwartship bearings in the gimbal ring, which in turn is mounted in fore and aft bearings inside the binnacle. This mounting permits the compass to remain upright regardless of the rolling and pitching of the ship. To make use of the information furnished by the master compass, a repeater system transmits readings to various locations throughout the ship. Here they are following precisely the movements of the master compass. Now let's see how this same indication is maintained on all repeaters simultaneously. This is accomplished by the phantom unit. Its movements turn a transmitter geared to the phantom in the same way as the azimuth motor. In fact, it looks like another small motor. But in effect, it is just the opposite. It doesn't do any work. Instead, it is driven by the large azimuth gear which is fastened to the phantom. The motion of the phantom is transmitted through this chain of gears to the shaft of the transmitter. By the use of this set of gears, a very small motion of the phantom may cause several revolutions of the transmitter shaft. Attached to the other end of this shaft is a pair of roller brushes which move across 12 segments. These segments are arranged in 4 groups of 3 each. They are numbered 1, 2, 3. The 4 number 1 segments are connected. The number 2s are connected, and all the 3s are connected. These 3 wires are then led in a cable to the repeater, which consists of a simple step-by-step motor. Here is the first wire connected to a pair of coils arranged this way. The second wire of the cable is connected to a similar pair of coils. The third wire is connected to a third pair of coils. The other 3 leads are connected to one side of the 70-volt DC power supply. In the center of these coils is the motor armature, which is geared to the repeater card. To complete the electrical circuit, the other side of the power supply leads to the roller brushes of the transmitter. These rollers are constructed so that they may connect segments of the same number at the same time. Here we see the brushes on a pair of number 1 segments. The circuit is then closed through the number 1 coils of the repeater motor. The magnetic field setup causes the repeater armature to take its position in line with this coil. When the transmitter moves to the next pair of segments, the number 2 coil of the motor is energized, and the armature takes its position in this magnetic field. As the transmitter moves to the next position, the number 3 coil is energized, and the repeater armature rotates to this position. Since the transmitter armature is geared to the phantom element of the master compass, its movement is determined by the movement of the phantom. Each revolution of the brushes sends out a series of impulses to the repeater motor, which is, in turn, geared to the repeater dial. Starting with the rotor, we have built and operated the 5 major assemblies of a typical gyrocompass. First, we put the rotor into a case and made the sensitive element. To this, we added the second unit, known as the phantom element. Its operation is controlled by the electronic follow-up system. Next, we saw how the sensitive element and the phantom are supported by a third major unit, the spider. Then we added our 4th unit, the mercury ballistic, to cause precession of the rotor. Finally, to complete the master compass, we installed it in the 5th major unit, the binnacle. This is the Sperry Mark 14 compass as it appears in the ship ready to get underway, equipped with control panel, follow-up panel, and repeater panel. The compass has more than 10,000 parts that make up a precision unit, delicate as a watch, yet rugged enough to withstand the rolling, pitching, and yawing of a ship in the heaviest sea. The entire compass system is dependent upon this precision.
Instrument, you must understand the principle of the gyroscope. It consists of a rotor Mounted in a gimbal, the rotor can spin in one plane only. When another gimbal is added, a second plane of movement is possible. And when this assembly is mounted in bearings, the rotor has 3 planes of movement and can assume any possible attitude. This is now a freely mounted gyroscope. A spinning gyro has 2 important properties: precession and rigidity in space. All of its practical applications are based on these 2 properties. As for rigidity in space, the spinning rotor remains in its original attitude, while the gimbals and base move around it. In other words, the gyro maintains its axis in relation to space and not to the surface of the Earth. If a gyro moves around the Earth, its axis is vertical to the Earth's surface here, at an angle here, and horizontal here. The gyro will resist any force that attempts to change its plane of rotation. This leads to the principle of precession. When a downward force is applied here, the gyro moves, but not in the direction of the applied force. Instead, it moves at right angles to the applied force. This action is known as precession. If an upward force is applied at the same place, the gyro again precesses at right angles, but in the opposite direction. The explanation is simple. The rotor is spinning in this direction. When the force is applied, the gyro precesses in a direction to align the direction of rotation with the direction of the applied force. The rate of precession is in direct proportion to the applied force. Small force, slow precession. Greater force, faster precession. If enough force is applied, the gyro precesses a full 90 degrees. However, at or near 90 degrees, it will tumble and go out of control. This disadvantage must be overcome in gyro instruments. Another disadvantage comes from the gyro's tendency to drift away from its original attitude. There are 2 types of drift. One is mechanical, due to friction in the bearings. This is actually a form of precession. The other type, known as apparent drift, relates to rigidity in space. Once again, consider this condition. The gyro maintains its attitude while the Earth turns under it. Every 6 hours, the gyro drifts through 90 degrees in relation to the Earth's surface. In order for the gyro instrument to be dependable, drift must be corrected continuously. There are several types of erection systems that correct for drift. The principle back of all these systems is based on 3 steps. The direction and degree of drift are measured by electrical or mechanical sensing elements. These elements then control the application of a proper force to the gyro, and it precesses back to its normal attitude. All gyros in this film are actually the rotors of electric motors. However, for simplicity, we will represent them like this, this, and this. We will start with the turn and slip indicator. It is really 2 instruments, each of which provides the pilot with information during a turn. This needle shows how much the aircraft is turning. This ball shows the kind of turn the aircraft is making. We will examine the turn needle first. It is actuated by a gyro, which is mounted in only 1 gimbal and in bearings that are secured to the case. The gyro can turn about the fore and aft axis, but not about the vertical axis. A spring restrains any movement of the gyro from its normal attitude. The gyro is linked to the turn needle like this. We will see how the property of precession is used to indicate the aircraft's rate of turn. When the aircraft turns to the right, forces are applied at the gyro bearings here and here. The rotor is spinning in this direction, so the forces cause it to precess in this direction. The linkage moves the needle in the direction of the turn. When the force of precession equals the spring tension, the needle indicates the rate of turn, as well as the direction. When the aircraft levels off, the spring erects the gyro to its normal attitude, and the needle returns to zero. A dampening piston and cylinder are linked to the gyro to steady any precession and prevent hunting by the needle. The ball is independent of the gyro. It is free to move back and forth in a curved tube. During straight and level flight, the force of gravity holds the ball in the center of the tube, and the aircraft is in balanced flight. During a turn, two additional forces affect the ball: horizontal lift and centrifugal force. When these two forces are equal, the aircraft is in a balanced turn, and the ball remains in the center of the tube. When the centrifugal force exceeds the horizontal lift, the aircraft skids, and the ball rolls toward the outside of the turn. When the horizontal lift exceeds the centrifugal force, the aircraft slips, and the ball rolls toward the inside of the turn. We will examine two attitude indicators: the H6 horizon indicator and the vertical gyro indicator. Each instrument continuously indicates the roll and pitch attitudes of the aircraft in relation to the actual horizon, and each obtains this information from a freely mounted gyro. The axis of the rotor is vertical and, due to the property of rigidity, will remain in this position as the aircraft assumes any attitude. Therefore, the gyro establishes a vertical reference from which roll and pitch deviations of the aircraft can be measured. It is unnecessary to cage the gyro in either instrument during any maneuvers. We will start with this one. This miniature plane represents the aircraft, and this bar represents the horizon. The horizon bar is mechanically linked to a gyro mounted in the case. The two supporting arms are connected to pivots at the rear of the outer gimbal and by pins to the inner gimbal. When the aircraft climbs, the gyro remains erect, while the aircraft and case move around it. This action lowers the horizon bar below the miniature plane. The instrument now indicates the aircraft's present attitude relative to the horizon. At plus or minus 27 degrees of pitch, the horizon bar reaches mechanical stops and ceases to give any further indication of pitch up or down. Some models of this instrument have a scale to indicate pitch to 80 degrees plus or minus. In addition to the horizon bar, this pointer is secured to the outer gimbal of the gyro. It is used with these fixed markings on the case to indicate the degree of roll. When the aircraft rolls, the gyro remains erect and holds the pointer in this position, while the horizon markings roll around it. The degree of roll can be read here. The pilot can use these knobs to adjust the positions of the miniature plane and horizon bar manually. Since the gyro is linked mechanically to the horizon bar and pointer, the dial must be mounted in a vertical position. This model of the attitude indicator has a fixed miniature plane and roll markings on the instrument face. Back of the dial face is a sphere representing Earth, sky, and horizon, with 5-degree markings for climb and dive. It is universally mounted, so it can rotate around this axis 82 degrees in either direction. and can roll 360 degrees around this axis. This pointer can move only around the roll axis. A remotely mounted gyro controls the sphere through two electric circuits, one for roll, the other for pitch. A position transmitter is in the roll axis of the gyro, and another is in the pitch axis. They connect through receivers and amplifiers to the servo motors that drive the sphere in pitch and roll. Assume the aircraft rolls 30 degrees. This transmitter measures the roll displacement of the aircraft from the vertical reference. This measurement, in terms of a small voltage, goes through the receiver and amplifier to the roll servo motor, which turns to position the sphere and pointer. The degree of roll is indicated by the pointer and roll markings. Assume the aircraft climbs at a 30-degree angle. This transmitter measures the angular motion in terms of a voltage. The amplified voltage drives the pitch servo motor, which turns to position the sphere. The degree of pitch can be read on the horizontal markings back of the miniature plane. When the aircraft reaches 82 degrees of pitch, the gyro goes through a controlled precession of exactly 180 degrees. As a result, the sphere also exactly reverses its position and continues to indicate the aircraft's changing attitude. This knob can be used to position the sphere electrically. The dial can be installed at any angle because the gyro is not mounted in the instrument case. We will examine two directional compasses, the C1 directional gyro heading indicator and the MA1 compass system. And we'll start with this one. The aircraft heading is indicated here, and the reciprocal heading here. To obtain this information, the instrument uses a freely mounted gyro. Due to its property of rigidity, the spin axis of the gyro will hold its attitude as the aircraft and instrument case turn about it. Secured to the outer gimbal is a gear. Its teeth mesh with the teeth of another gear, to which the compass card is attached. Before it can indicate correct headings, the compass card must be set to the heading of the aircraft, as indicated by the magnetic compass. The push-to-cage knob is used to make the setting, after which the gyro controls the compass card. Assume the aircraft makes a 90-degree turn. The instrument case turns around the gyro and lower gear. As a result, the vertical gear makes a quarter turn as it travels around the lower gear. So the compass card also makes a 90-degree turn. Any climb or descent will not affect the compass card unless the heading changes. However, if the pitch or roll of the aircraft exceeds 60 degrees, the gyro will tumble and may be damaged, and the instrument will give inaccurate readings. Therefore, when entering a maneuver that may exceed the limitations, the gyro must be caged. The instrument will be safe, but out of operation. When the maneuver has been completed, the magnetic compass heading must be set into the instrument again. In this instrument, apparent drift causes the compass card to drift away from its heading about 3 degrees every 15 minutes. And so, every 15 minutes, it must be reset to the magnetic compass heading. We have seen that a gyro is stable and accurate for short periods of time, but is subject to long-period drift. In contrast, a magnetic compass is accurate over long periods, but subject to short-period instability and oscillations. The magnetic compass is particularly accurate between 60 degrees north and south latitudes. But near either of the poles, the dip angle of the Earth's magnetic lines of force causes this compass to become unstable. The MA1 compass system combines these two instruments into one system that uses their advantages and eliminates their disadvantages. The magnetic compass, in the form of a flux valve, is mounted remotely in the tail or wingtip, away from the worst magnetic disturbances within the aircraft. The gyro is also mounted remotely from the indicator dial. The system is designed for two modes of operation. In the free gyro mode, the gyro alone controls the indicator dial. In the slaved mode, the magnetic compass controls the gyro. We will first examine the slaved mode of operation. We will represent the flux valve as a magnetic needle mounted on the rotor of a synchro transmitter. The needle will remain aligned with the Earth's magnetic field while the aircraft turns in any direction. The stator of the compass transmitter is connected electrically to the stator of a synchro control transformer. The gyro's outer gimbal is mounted on the rotor of this synchro. When the outer gimbal is properly oriented to the magnetic needle, there is zero output from the control transformer. But if the aircraft changes heading or the gyro drifts around the vertical axis, the outer gimbal is not properly oriented. The control transformer immediately sends an error signal through an amplifier to the torque motor mounted on the inner gimbal. The torque motor applies the proper torque to the inner gimbal, and the outer gimbal precesses to proper orientation with the magnetic needle, at which time the error signal is canceled. The magnetic needle may oscillate and send an oscillating signal to the gyro. However, the gyro's rigidity in space is such that it does not respond quickly to slight changes in the needle. Instead, it aligns itself with the average position of the needle. Mounted above the gyro is a synchro transmitter, which continuously measures the deviation of the gyro case from the outer gimbal. It transmits this information to the indicator dial, where another synchro positions the compass card to indicate the aircraft's heading. Thus, in the slaved mode of operation, the gyro is a drift-free, stable indicator of magnetic direction. In the free gyro mode, the flux valve is disconnected from the gyro. When the gyro is oriented properly, it tends to hold that orientation. However, it is subject to apparent drift, which increases as the gyro approaches one of the poles. Apparent drift is corrected automatically by latitude compensation circuit. The aircraft's latitude is set manually into the system and changed whenever necessary. This sends an appropriate and constant voltage to this torque motor. The motor applies a constant torque to the inner gimbal. As a result, the outer gimbal precesses constantly at a given rate to offset the apparent drift, and the gyro sends accurate directional information to the indicator dial. Electric gyroscopic instruments are dependable at the low atmospheric pressures and temperatures in which modern high-performance aircraft must operate.